one of the things that the leaders that are listening to this podcast are all going to have to deal with is leading organizational change. And the joke I like to say is, nobody likes change, but they won't be against progress. And so if you could frame it as progress rather than change, you might get more folks to buy into it.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Slow Smoke Business Podcast. I'm your host, Jarrod Morgan. Thanks for being with us today. And we have my new friend, David Fivecoat, on the show. Welcome, David.
Hey, Jarrod. Happy to be on today.
David is a military hero. He's a long career in the military, has brought a lot of leadership training into the private sector. So I want to talk to David about leadership and also drink a little bit with David. He's got I believe, what do you got there? PBR?
I got a PBR ready to go to complement the chicken.
And I've got a little bit of Peerless Rye in a glass with just ice. And today we are cooking some chicken. We know people that watch the show a lot. If you're watching along on Facebook or on YouTube, I do chicken a lot. So this is a whole chicken. You see that, David?
Yeah, that looks great.
This is a whole chicken. It's kind of flattened because we did a lot of maneuvering this thing a little bit, but we have stuffed it with jalapeno cornbread, not actually cooked cornbread. It's just like the cornbread, uncooked. And then we've stuffed that in there. And then we seasoned it with a pecan barbecue rub, which is my favorite. # not a sponsor, from our friends at Meat Church. And we're going to put this on the grill and just kind of let it cook. Now, when I cook stuff with jalapeno in it, what that usually means is I get it all because nobody in the house actually likes to eat spicy stuff. And so that's like a little hack for me, right? I make a little something spicy and I get all of it. And it's so floppy with the stuff in there that I can't do it with tongs. And so I'm going to try to do it with gloved hands. Here we go. God, it looks like a frog almost. I've crumpled it up so much. Got a good sizzle going there, baby. What do you think, David? Does that look good?
That looks great.
You ever do any grilling in your backyard over there? David's in Columbus, Georgia, so it should be. It's not a totally far-fetched idea.
Yeah, no, I've got a grill on the back stoop. I'd like to do bratwurst, burgers, and some steaks on the grill, but I'm not a grill master like you are.
I would call myself an enthusiast, but not a master, right? I've not leveled up to that level. So we're going to hit it with a little more. I like my stuff heavily seasoned. And when you use something like a pecan rub, it's mostly sugar and spices and stuff like that, but it's not spicy. So, you're not going to nuke people with flavor there.
Jarrod, what was the seasoning that you put on?
So again, we have a little joke on the show. We have no sponsors. So we say # not a sponsor. And so at some point I'm going to stop giving these guys free advertising. But we went with the D's Nuts from Meat Church. I do think they've toned down the branding on this one. It is a pecan rub. So it's got like brown sugar and I think granulated honey in it, but also like pecans in it. And so it gives it kind of a nice little. It's just a different flavor. It's not just all sugar. It's kind of got a little earthiness to it. And it's nice. I've never met anybody that didn't like that. I've also never met a piece of meat that seasoning did not improve.
Yeah, and it keeps to your southern roots with pecan country around here.
Pecan, right? Or pecan. Or I think I was talking to my producer and I think I heard him say the pecan. One to nuts. It's pecan, if you want to get real southern.
It's definitely pecan.
So we got the grill on. It's pecan. Okay. Pecan. I forgot to put the probes in there. Let me do that so we can keep an eye on it. These probes are like barbecue cheating, man. It's like it's so easy to cook things right when you've got the probes in them. And it's just got a digital reading there on the side that I can keep an eye on. So, man, yeah, last episode we made some picanha using the probes and everything. That is one of my new favorite things to do. It's like sort of like a different kind of beef cut instead of brisket. It's like a different kind. Cut the fat off, slow roasted. Good God, that was good.
How long do you have to leave that on the grill?
Probably about 2 hours. Not long, 2 hours, slow, 250, 225 to 250, kind of kept it in that range, and pulled it off right at kind of medium rare temperature. And man, oh man, like just kind of cut some strips of it. You can do the what do they call it, chimichurri on that too. I didn't have any, um, but just like a brisket rub and doing that clean like that was, man, get you some of that.
Yeah. No, that sounds great. I do a pulled pork in the slow cooker, which is sort of
Okay.
that's my house specialty.
Yeah, pork you can do. I mean, if you start melting the fat inside of pork and let it kind of marry with the meat, there's all sorts of goodness that can happen there, whether you've got smoke going or not. Like that stuff tastes good.
Yeah.
Sorry to my vegetarian vegan brothers out there, but this is not a vegan podcast.
You'll have to do the almost meat for one of the
I'm not
episodes.
doing that. That's I'd so where what so the reason that there's something wrong with impossible meats is if it's so great, why do I have to make it look like meat? Why do I have to call it an impossible hamburger? Why do I have to call it a hamburger? If it's so great, why can't it just be, leaf juice or whatever the hell it is, right? Why do I have to try to pretend like it's, if it's so great, why do we, I don't know, what's the analogy for that? Like, oh man, no, you should totally drive this gas car. You should drive this electric car, but you're gonna pretend like you're putting the gas in it every time because it's just gonna feel right. Or it's no, man. Like embrace what it is. If you're trying to eat, whatever dirt paste or whatever they do to put in that stuff, like I'm not for it. I don't need to be faked. It's unnatural. It's unholy.
All right,
Enough about
strong opinions on fake meat.
enough about that. Yeah, Fake Meat was the name of my band in college. Anyway, so David, long career in the military. Tell me a little bit about that. When did you get into the military? What branch were you in?
Yeah, so I grew up in a little town in Ohio called Delaware, Ohio, right north of Columbus. I am an Ohio State Buckeye fan, so for
Wow.
your SEC fans out here, I was up in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium for the playoffs, and
Wow.
I took my daughter with me, who's jumped ship on me, and she's now a Georgia fan, and so
Oh,
she was super happy when Ohio State missed the field goal, and I was super sad.
what a moment that was. By the way, so I'm a Florida alum, right? And gleefully lived through the Urban Meyer years. What's your thoughts on Urban Meyer as a Buckeye? Good, bad, like fond memories, wish he never showed up. What do you think?
Every program he leaves is sort of is under a cloud, and
Yeah.
he struggled at in the pros as well. Florida, he left with a bad taste. Ohio State, he left with a
Oh
bad
yeah.
taste, and then there. He's an okay guy. I enjoyed reading his book on leadership and how they created the team and some of the things that are important to him as a coach. But man, there's something there on the ethics side that isn't. It's almost right, but it's not quite right. It's almost like that impossible meats kind of thing.
Yeah. The impossible coach. Right. No, I think there's something to learn from that situation though, because I think I feel like when I was younger and he first got to Florida, and I was only a year or two off campus at that point. Like I had just left, and I just thought that guy was the greatest example of a go-getter that you could possibly. I just thought I thought he was everything, right? And I studied the way he talked, the way he led his teams, the way he organized himself, and everything else. And I learned through the years that you can't completely 100% idolize human beings because there's always a side of every single person that you're like, I need some of this. Like, there's absolutely some things you could look at Urban Meyer's life and go, wow, there's some incredible stuff to emulate there, a lot of lessons to learn. But then there's also like a whole bunch of stuff where you're like, yeah, I don't want any of that, right? I don't want the whole work yourself into an early grave, health situations, quit a job, join a job, kind of win at all costs, kind of garbage. Like I'll do without that.
Human beings have human limitations, and unfortunately, we built some folks up on a pedestal that they've got the same limitations that everybody else does, and the same flaws, and they aren't perfect. And Urban's a good example. Yeah, you're spot on. He's very well organized, had a great idea with offense, and really,
Oh yeah.
approached the game innovatively. He found a way to win with Tim Tebow that nobody else could, and but then there's some ethics kind of things that aren't quite right, and
Yeah, just decision making is not real great there. But so I derailed your conversation about your military career as soon as you
yeah.
said Buckeyes. Like I was like football. Let's talk about that. But so what branch did you end up in?
Yeah, so I went to West Point,
Wow.
mainly because I loved reading about military history, and of course, all the World War II generals had attended West Point. Um, I applied early, got in, and made the decision to go, and ended up branching infantry. So I was an Army officer that served in the infantry. I led platoons, which is about 40 guys, companies, which is
Wow.
120, battalions, which is about 700, and then a brigade, which is a couple of thousand folks. Um, I did along the way. I went to Korea for a year. I went to Kosovo for 6 months, Bosnia for 6 months,
Whoa.
3 trips to Iraq, and a trip to Afghanistan. The trip to Afghanistan, I was the battalion commander, which is a 700-person organization, and we had a really tough fight in 2010 and 2011 down in southeast Afghanistan. Um,
Wow.
and so eventually, I culminated my career here at Fort Benning, Georgia, which is right down the road from where I am in Columbus, Georgia, as the commander of the Airborne and Ranger Training Brigade. So I ran our airborne school, which produces paratroopers and teaches folks how to fall out of a plane and walk away from it, and also Ranger School, which is the Army's premier small unit leadership school.
Wow.
And so in 17, I transitioned just like you, and tried to figure out this corporate world thing.
Yeah, so you sort of alluded to it there. I've recently retired from the company I started, Procter U, and the transition is interesting, right? I'm still in the early stages of it. So you do something for me, it was a decade and a half, and really, like if I think about the origins of the story, it's really about 18 years is really kind of where the journey kind of began. Um, what is transition? I mean, you're a few years ahead of me in that. So, what did your transition look like? I would say the move to civilian life out of the military is infinitely more complex than the move I've made. So what was that transition like for you?
Yeah, transitions are interesting. You're in the early stages, and I'm sure one of the big things with your transition is your identity was tied to being part of this company. I think you were a founder of it,
Oh
so
yeah, I was the
you
founder.
went
Yeah.
from zero to whatever with that company, and your identity was totally tied up to it. My identity was tied up with being in the military because I had been in the military from age 18 to 46, and it was a large part of my adult life. Um, with anybody that goes through one of these transitions, one of the big things to think about is how are you going to reinvent your identity? One of the strategies that I used as a bridging kind of solution was athletics. I always loved the portion of the Army that we got to work out and get paid for it. I'm like, hey, I'm a professional athlete because every morning from 6:30 in the morning till 8, I get paid to work out, and that was one of the big things that I loved about the Army. And so when I got out of the Army, I continued. Uh, my pursuit of athletics. I got into triathlons and I raced a couple of half Ironmans. And then COVID hit. And at that point in time, I decided I couldn't get to the pool because the pool was closed. And I was like, okay, I'll just focus on cycling. And so throughout this, now it's almost a 6, 7 year journey post Army. Athletics has been important to me, and it's been one of those sort of bridging things that's helped me create a new identity. In this case, as a small business owner, a person that's an executive coach that does leadership training. Also, athletics is an important part of my life. For you, ha- as you approach this transition from, you're still on the board, so you're still involved with the company, but
Yeah.
how are you thinking about reinventing your identity as you go forward?
Well, I very rarely get interviewed myself on this podcast, so thank you for asking me a question. I would say that's probably the hardest thing about this transition, because I started something from the ground up. Um, and I remember moments of people saying, that Procter U, which went on to be, something that people use on every continent on the planet, and millions and millions of people are using it. I remember when it was, my friends would refer to it as that crazy thing that Jared's doing, that I keep seeing him kind of mention half-heartedly on Facebook, that he's like doing this, and and there's all these photos of my daughters, visiting me at the office and pretending to sit at a computer and operate it like a proctor, and and hugging our little mascot suit that we had, and so when you sort of wind up all of that stuff into your story, it very much becomes a part of who you are. And I'm sure for your story, like, I mean, it wouldn't be hard for me to just pilfer through the photo albums of your life, and there's just military everywhere, right? It's a
Yep.
part of who you are. There's photos of you in Afghanistan and everywhere else, right? And so it really becomes, when you dedicate yourself to something like that for so long, it really becomes a part of who you are. And when you're introduced to people and things like, that's the first sentence people say about you is, "Oh, that's the guy that's da 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 da," right?
Yeah.
And so when that thing changes and it's abruptly like no longer a part of who you currently are, it's who you were. Um, I spent some time. This podcast is really something that came from the self reflection of realizing that that was coming. So you had talked about like thinking about yourself as a professional athlete. I started thinking about myself as somebody that had had a lot of crazy business experiences that didn't listen. I'm a college dropout. Like I didn't finish college. I didn't get my bachelor's degree, and I didn't go get an MBA. And yet I've been asked to speak at Columbia University, and I've done all these like lectures and all these other things. And so I think there's a lot for me to share with people that hadn't had access to a lot of the super upper level training of a Harvard Business School or something like that. But I would take my experience and put it alongside really anybody's kind of MBA sort of know-how. And that was the part that sort of gave me an opportunity to say that's what I want to be in this next chapter, right? Is I want to be a guy who makes this type of information approachable, and that's why we grill out. That's why it's such a low key kind of podcast. Is I wanted to make a business podcast for people that don't like business podcasts, so that they could learn. But it it was that I had to kind of go through that exercise of like, who am I and what am I about? Um, but I had this. I'm curious to see if you had the same experience, but I had this realization a couple of years ago that some of the greatest breakthroughs in my life came right after a period of reinvention. So I kind of look back in my life and I realized like some of the best things I ever accomplished, the things I'm the most proud of, building a business, you know, restarting, but getting remarried to my wife Amanda, and just all these things came after a season of complete reinvention. And that gave me a lot of peace in going into this season, and that, yeah, I'm going to need to reinvent myself a little bit. But historically, some of the best things I've ever done and the things I'm the most proud of came after that reinvention. Did you feel that going into this, that you needed to do some kind of reinvention of yourself?
It's sort of the same thing. I phrase it a little bit differently, and um, the fact, one of the things, and maybe it was my own reinvention, was uh, I needed to be open to some new ideas, and so the first thing, so I got out of the army and I worked for another company for a couple of years, and then left that company in early 20 and decided to found my own company in March of 2020. So, perfect business time to start a company. Um, and I wanted, I sort of wanted to do leadership training and, talks and stuff like that. And that's what I wanted to do with it. One of the more interesting things, as just like every small business owner, I went a whole quarter without a client. I'm wondering like, hey, am I going to be able to keep the lights on? And, it's the middle of COVID, we're locked down, and, all this challenging. But one of the things, and maybe you went through the same thing when you started your company, but I was open to new ideas. And at one point in time, I was talking to this client that I thought I was going to get some work out of, and she was like, "Hey, do you, you're kind of gritty. You've done some gritty things. Why don't you look at this guy's stuff that we're thinking about hiring to teach grit to the company?"
Yeah, I led a battle in Afghanistan. That was a little gritty,
Yeah,
right? That
yeah.
was that's a gritty
And so,
thing.
so, so I looked at the guy's stuff, and I had read Angela Duckworth's stuff, and I thought they were both good, but I thought they both missed out on sort of creating a path or a process to build grit in yourself, which is what we all want. We all want to accomplish our
Yeah.
long term goals, and the way to get there is grit. And and so I came back and I gave her my review. I think they still went and hired the guy. Um, but in the end, she was like, "Hey, why don't you write a book about grit?" And I had I'd always wanted to write a book. The light bulb went off, and that got me fired up. And I buckled down and wrote a book called "Grow Your Grit." Um, a few months later, I was talking to another client who I thought wanted a book talk, and she was like, "Hey, do you do executive coaching?"
Oh wow.
And I was like, heck yes, I do executive coaching. I've been coaching
Yeah.
folks all my life. And
Sure.
that to me has been the executive coaching piece has been the rewarding way to give back and work with folks and help them learn and grow and develop in the same way that I think your slow smoke business is doing that for you. Um, but both those things, I had to be, whether you call it a pivot or just open to new ideas. As I'm trying to sort through what the next step is, I had to be open and be ready to seize what the world threw at me.
So before we got on this podcast, one of the things I wanted to ask you was about leadership. And because I think, you hear people say things that are somewhat cliche about, you know, I lead people into battle. I led someone into battle or whatever. You've literally led people into battle. So when you think about what the concept of leadership is or what is a leader, what how would you define leadership or what is a leader?
That's a huge topic. Um,
Sure.
I think the first thing to think about is the movies are a bit cliche on military leadership and this idea that there's this draconian sort of you order folks around and there's instantaneous obedience and all that. um, you can do that once, especially when you're putting folks in harm's way. um, but by and large you have to show that, lead by example, show that what you're doing is the right thing to do, and you've got to get buy-in out of the organization. To me, that's one of the biggest sort of misconceptions about the army is it is you're putting folks in harm's way. During my battalion, I led the 3rd Battalion 187 Infantry in Afghanistan. During
Wow.
our year there in Afghanistan, we lost 3 soldiers and had another 100
Mm.
wounded. And so you're asking folks to do tough stuff. There's lots of emotion involved in doing that. You have to do it in a way that folks want to do it, and that's sort of the art of leadership, not really the science. But that that to me is sort of leadership in sort of the toughest conditions imaginable.
Let me give a little check to the chicken here. See how we're doing. Okay. So I've got I've got very v- varying probes here. So probe B is 126 and one is 90. That's a 20 127. Was a 30-degree swing. So we're having some changes here. That means I probably don't have the probe all the way into the meat, and I just burned the holy heck out of my hand. So I'm going to close that, and I'll go off of the lower one.
The probe is hot.
The probe is hot. Yeah. So it's so cool to hear you talk about some of these stories too, because I think you when you think of leadership, for me, leadership has always been about, you know, responsibility. And I used to would talk to people in our company that would, the hardest move in your career is moving from contributor, line level employee to now I've been asked to lead other people. And you may move into other roles further and further in your career, but surely one of the most difficult moves you'll ever make is the moment when your job no longer just hinges on what you do. It hinges on what other people do through your influence. And one of the things I tried to impress upon people that were going through that change was that you no longer have a job, you have responsibilities. And those responsibilities don't end when you go home, and they don't end. And I know there's this whole like movement about overworking and but the point is like you are responsible. It may be 5 minutes before you're supposed to go home, but then there's some crisis and you are just as responsible for it as you would have been if it had happened 3 hours ago. And the leaders that fail to grasp that, that still look at their job as an input and an output. I'm supposed to put in this many hours and get this much money out. Are the people that, yeah, they probably survive day to day, but they really struggle to level up in their career and get to really great moments because they have failed to look at their career as a set of missions and responsibilities instead of a job and tasks to get paid for.
Yeah, so what you're talking about is folks going from sort of a tactical level position to maybe a strategic level leader, and that
Right.
jump is tough. The most important things out of that strategic level person is to think about, you've got to provide the vision, direction, and guidance for the organization. You've got to communicate to the organization, and then oftentimes, like in your role in the old company, you had to communicate up and out. You had to communicate to investors, communicate to the board,
Sure.
communicate to potential clients, and then you got to supervise the team's execution. And those sort of five thing or three things: providing guidance and direction and a vision, communicating it, and then supervising the execution are really what makes the difference in these leaders that are no longer sort of direct leaders, from a group of 5 to 10 folks, and they're managing this huge organization.
Yeah.
And that idea of how you supervise the execution and the processes that you have to put in place, especially as you jump up a couple levels, that's a real challenge. And one of the groups of executives that I'm doing executive coaching with, uh, I as part of my executive coaching program, I call it the Take Your Coach to Work Day. And so I will fly out and follow around the executive for a day,
Wow.
and the inputs and just observations that I've been able to help these folks see, and how they run a visit at one of their locations, how they can improve that, how they can think about their own system and processes to make themselves more effective, and be value added, and not just if you visit a place, if you supervise 45 locations, and you visit one and you come back 180 days later and you don't have a good set of processes, that that location is going to be in the same place it was when you showed up. And
Sure.
some of it is how you're coaching the leader below you, how you're influencing that person that's on the ground there every day, and then how you're doing your follow-up. It's fascinating. I really get fired up about this. We can talk about this stuff for hours, about how you set up your processes as a leader, as you're out there, checking on locations and visiting parts of the group that you supervise.
There's a question I wanted to ask you as well. That I mean, maybe this is a hard question, so I don't know if you need to take a swig of the PBR before you like dive into this. But which I'm getting
Uh-oh.
dry here, by the way. I need to go. I need to probably re up here in a minute.
Yeah, you need
But
another rye.
so it's when people think of leadership and they imagine themselves moving into a leadership role, oftentimes you're really only envisioning yourself standing on the top of the mountain, on the top of the podium in a situation where you've led somebody into success And you think about it in terms of what things look like when things are going really, really well. And you talked about your time in Afghanistan and Kosovo and some really challenging places, but Afghanistan in particular, extraordinarily challenging situation that our armed forces were in. Which, by the way, it's probably cliche to say this, but I would thank you for your service, all you did for our country. I mean that not in disingenuous way, but genuinely. Like, it's impressive to see somebody dedicate so much of their life to everybody else in their country. So thank you for that.
No, thanks, Jarrod.
Um,
Appreciate it.
but particularly sort of pointing at Afghanistan and seeing on what you can draw from situations like that. How do you lead people when things are not going well? How do you lead people when you are coming off of a loss or coming off of a situation that did not go the way it was supposed to go, and people are shook up or they're hurting or they're scared? What does leadership look like in those moments?
Yeah. So, the most important thing is what I would call is over communicate at that point in time. And in communication, it's not just talking. One of the skills that we all need to develop better, especially as leaders, is being able to listen and hear the
Mm,
organization, listen to the organization, hear what it's saying, and be able to provide it what it needs. Um, One of the things that the leaders that are listening to this podcast are all going to have to deal with is leading organizational change. And the joke I like to say is, nobody likes change, but they won't be against progress. And so if you could frame it as progress rather than change, you might get more folks to buy into it. But overcoming that resistance to change, which your company grew from one person to hundreds or even thousands of folks. There was lots of change involved in there, and there was lots of resistance to change. Was just talking to a guy today about this idea of doing uh, more sort of town hall meetings as he's trying to lead this
mm,
change in his organization. One of the things that I did badly was I led this huge change in Ranger School. Ranger School had never had a woman attend Ranger School until 2015. We led the gender integration of Ranger School. The first 19 women attended Ranger School and 3 graduated,
wow.
which eventually influenced the Army to open all jobs and all units to everyone. But there was huge resistance to change, and one of the things that we did at the end of it was go around and do a town hall meeting with each of the subordinate organizations, 9 organizations total. And if I had to do it all over again and I coach anybody that I talk to about it, I would have done that at the beginning and the end. Uh, of any time you're leading some sort of seismic or huge organizational change, it's worth your time, one, to listen to the organization, and two, to reinforce your message multiple levels down. It takes a lot of time. It's not easy, but it's time well spent and helps smooth out that resistance to change and brings folks becoming at least uh, you know passive supporters of the change rather than active resistors.
So communication is a key element of leadership in difficult times,
Yeah,
right? Is that what you're saying? Like, is
yeah.
communication is it everything or is it the main thing?
It's the main thing. You want to lead by example. You've got to show, you as the leader has to show some optimism
Mm,
as part of it, because if you're pessimistic, the whole organization is going to be pessimistic.
right.
Communication, optimism, and leading by example, I would say, are the 3 things to fall back on, especially when times are tough or you're leading through crisis. Uh, y- y- you know, uh, right now, with folks are dealing, folks led through, the COVID crisis, and I don't think folks give themselves enough credit for how they handled it and led their organization and their team through that, which is going to be our generation's equivalent of the depression.
Yeah.
This 2 to 3 year kind of thing, and how you led your team through that is important. um, but to go back to your question, I I really think leading by example, showing some optimism, and then communicating with the organization to the point where you're over communicating to the organization are the three keys to lead any organization through tough times or tumultuous times.
I agree. I'm gonna give a peek to the chicken again.
All right.
While I'm doing that, oh yeah, baby, it's getting a little crisp there on the wings. Come on. So, if you're looking at a team and you've got some leaders, do you feel like leadership is something that can be taught, or do you feel like it's something that people are born with, and you just meet some people that this person's never going to be a leader?
I'm of course convinced that leadership can be trained. You can improve your leadership. You can make it better. Some, there are folks that are naturally skilled at it, and there's other folks that don't have as much skills. But certainly in my role now as first in the Army, I saw folks grow and develop as leaders, and now as an executive coach working with corporate executives, I see folks grow and develop as leaders in that capacity as well. Um, it takes some work. You have to have a little bit of humility and be able to listen and understand. Take the feedback and there's so many tools out there now. You can take assessments, you can do 360s, you can get an executive coach, you can go to classes on it. There are so many ways to develop your leadership skills out there. um, I don't know. Did you see it in the company? Did you see folks grow and develop as leaders as they moved up the ladder, or as they got more experience in positions?
Yeah, so maybe this is a bit of a controversial position to take on that, but I feel like great leadership is something you sort of are you're born with the ability to get there. You have to train yourself to get there. I
Yeah.
think everybody can be trained to be an effective leader. Effective leader.
Okay.
I think I think you have to have some level. The people that become great ones, really great ones, people that would just line up to lead that, to have that person lead them into, whatever. Scott McFarlane was outstanding CEO of Procter U, great friend, incredible person. And one of the things I noticed about him from a business perspective was when I first started working with him, and I remember going to have coffee with him, and we bumped into some people that he had previously worked with, and the reverence that people had about that guy when they talked about it. Oh man, this guy loved anything. I mean, and he could call on people that had great jobs and were doing really well, but they had worked with him in the company. He's like in the past, and he would say, "Well, would you consider coming to work?" And they just are willing to drop everything and come work with him. And it was because he had that like extra thing that people just wanted to gravitate towards. And so I feel like, like I said, I think everybody can be trained to be a leader and get the job done. To be one that really, really puts a dent in the universe, I think you sort of have to have that ability to stand up in front of people. And it doesn't mean you have to be an extrovert. I've met plenty of introverted people that are great leaders. But it does mean that you have to be comfortable speaking in front of people, and you have to be comfortable disappointing people in the short term because you are looking at the long term. And I've often said, leaders, one of the hallmarks of great leaders is the ability to make hard decisions, because hard decisions are the hallmark of leadership. Like, if you just listen to the troops, you just listen. I shouldn't use that phrase in your presence because it's literal troops when you think about it. But if you're just listening to the people that you're leading, they are not always going to lead you where the organization needs to go. And you have to be smart enough as a leader to sort of filter out what is genuine feedback that's relative to the mission, and what's noise where people are worried about whatever it is that they can sort of see not further than the hood of the car.
Right.
And it's hard, that part's hard to train. I think it's harder. It's easy to sort of show people the little system. You talked about systems and organization, like you can train that stuff, right? It's
Yep.
like, this is how you should say, this is how you should run your day, this is how you should say, this is how you should feedback, give feedback to people, this is how you should follow up. It's harder to get people to understand the nuance of what they're hearing from the people that they're leading, and figuring out what's real and what's something that they got to push through.
Right. I wouldn't say that's a controversial point.
Well, saying people are you're born to be a leader or not, I think, oh, what do you mean? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think the great ones probably are wake up in the morning and are 50% of the way there.
Yeah.
But there's a lot, but a lot of them are idiots and schmucks and can't get the other 50% because they're arrogant or whatever. They're lazy. I've got a lot of people that I've known in high school and in college that I thought were going to be incredible leaders one day and have turned out to be anything but, right? And
Right.
for a variety of reasons.
It is always funny to look at, look back at your high school friends or college friends and see who derailed and who was able to achieve greatness.
Yeah.
It's not always the person that you thought, right?
No, and it's a shame when you sort of see people that I mean, I know people that I went to college with that gosh, were just 10 times had way more to work with than I did. Like, just 10 times more charisma and um just everything. But then there was some other fatal flaw, the ability to get, distracted, or the ability to just never want to work hard, or never, it's just different, depends on who you're talking about, right? I mean, there's it's sad to see people self-destruct. There's an author, I think her name is Brianna West, and she wrote a book called The Mountain Is You, and I just started this book, and it's all about making people realize that the thing that's standing in the way of them having the life they want, the career they want, the success they want, the relationships they want, or whatever, is oftentimes themselves, right? And their
Right.
habits and their belief systems. And it's hard to get people to sort of see that, look inwardly into that.
Like you said, there's a huge amount of, folks may have a whole bunch of the skills, but they lack perseverance.
Yeah.
They don't build good habits, so they're not able to make, small incremental improvements every day and get themselves to wherever they want to go. It 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 is like you said. I think sometimes folks uh, have that, they can't get out of their own way,
Right.
and they got all this talent, and yet they can't overcome themselves.
It's a shame when that happens too, because
Yeah.
I think if you have as a spiritual person, like, I feel like if God's given you the ability to do some great things, it's almost like your responsibility to go do them, because you never know what's on the other side of that, or what's going to happen, what missions or opportunities to help people are going to emerge as you go on that journey of trying to be the best, most effective person that you can become. And I don't think the I don't think a lot of people appreciate that if you have the talent and the know-how, that you almost have a responsibility to go take that as far as you can take it,
Yeah.
within reason, because there's some reason that you're supposed to do that. There's some reason why you were given those gifts, and there's no way to know what that reason is until you embark on that journey.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is some high level Oprah stuff right here. This is like,
we're we're going we're we're going a
I
lot
better pour
farther.
some more whiskey and check the chicken here to just take the temperature down here. All right, so we're getting real close. What you think, David?
I think it looks good. Well, the
We're
the
getting there.
the
We've got one
overhead
probe
cam.
reading 132, which is firm salmonella territory. So we want to be careful with that.
You trying to get to 160?
I'm going to try to get to 160, maybe 165. I just pushed that one in a little bit further because the other probe's reading 179, but it's really on the very outer edge of it. And when you do the challenge here is when you stuff a chicken with cornbread, like that, cornbread batter, I guess you would say, is if you stick the probe into the cornbread part, you're just measuring the cornbread, and that's not really telling you what you need to know. You need to know what the
Yeah.
I mean, it's relevant, but you need to know what the meat's doing. So you've started your business. How do you find clients right now? How are you finding business?
Yeah, so one of the things that I do is I blog every Tuesday.
Oh, nice.
So on the Fivecoat Consulting Group .com. This year, I set out to do a series on leaders and leadership from World War II, in specific U.S. leaders in the U.S. and allied leaders in the European theater of operations. And so I started
Wow.
out, did some stuff with Eisenhower. This week was Bradley. Last week was General Gavin. And then I'm going to work my way all the way down to the troops that go ashore at Utah and Omaha Beach on D-Day, and then we'll cover Market Garden in the fall, and then the Battle of the Bulge around Christmas time. Um, There'll end up being about 40 blog posts on leaders.
Wow.
Omar Bradley was one of the 4-star generals. He eventually makes 5-star general after the war, but he was one of the key subordinates of Eisenhower in the war. But in 1970, he gives his talk to the Army War College about what he thought leadership was, and so I went through that and listed out the 10 things that Bradley thought was important about leadership, and shared that with the group that follows me. I also blog once a month on the war in Ukraine.
Wow.
When the war kicked off last February, I got super engrossed in it, and it's not anything on leadership, but I tracked the number of vehicles that are destroyed on either side through open source system called or website called Onyx, and try to make some assessments off of those losses on both the Ukrainian side and the Russian side. So that's what I do.
That's super interesting. I did not intend to ask this, but now that I know that you've looked at it, I mean, from a high level, what is your opinion of what's going on in the Ukraine? Is it a true stalemate? Is where do you think this is headed?
So first off, I'll say that I am surprised that Russia has been able to absorb the tank and infantry fighting vehicle losses that they've taken over the last now 13, 14 months. Um, just the sheer number of they've lost almost 2,000 tanks.
Wow. Holy moly.
Yeah, the front did not move much in March. So I publish at the beginning of the month. The first Tuesday of the month is always the Ukraine blog post. Um, they lost about 100 tanks in the month of March. They'll probably lose 100 to 150 here in April. But not much territory changed hands in March. Part of that was it was winter, and it's not easy to drive around frozen or muddy fields, and so neither side has really sort of gotten to to get an advantage. So yes, it is kind of a stalemate right now. Um, and it will be interesting to see where it goes here in the coming months. Still can't believe the amount of losses that the Russians have taken over the last 14 months, though.
Yeah, I mean, I think the popular opinion when this started was that, oh my God, Russia's going to like just steamroll Ukraine, and we're going to be looking at, who knows, another Georgia situation, something like that,
Yeah,
and it's been anything but that, right? And here you're
right.
talking about just the tremendous amount of losses and how sort of pot committed Russia seems to be now, because they have lost so much in the pursuit of this, for them to be, perceived as one of the world's superpowers. Backing down would be quite a blow, I think, to their national ego, and I don't know that that's in the cards. But I don't know. I mean, to your point, like, I don't know how they sustain that kind of losses. I mean, at some point there is I saw some expert that said that there's not Russia or its predecessors have never lost a war. I'm gonna butcher the stat, but it's sort of like never lost a war where they haven't lost like something crazy, like 500,000 men or something wild like that.
Yeah,
And so until they get to that crazy number, they're not even going to consider pulling out.
yeah.
I don't know if you saw me just sneak off a second ago, but I re-upped on some whiskey there. Thank you very much. How's the PBR coming? Good.
PBR's still cold.
I
It looks
love
like it
it.
would go great with that chicken.
PBR underrated. So underneath, or excuse me, behind you, I see a very interesting flag on the wall.
Yeah, so that's a Iraqi flag that I captured in Mosul, Iraq in 2003 as part of the invasion. So it's 20 years since the invasion. So it would have been right about this time in April. I was part of the 101st Airborne Division. We fought our way from the Kuwait border up to Baghdad, and then went all the way up to Mosul in the north. And so I got that when we made it to Mosul.
Wow.
One of the few things that I brought home from that part of the war. And then I got to go back to Iraq in 2005, and then again in 2007 and 8 for a threefer.
I got chills when you just said that, by the way. Like, I literally got kind of overcome for a moment, like you talking about bringing a flag home from Mosul. I mean, my goodness, like what an incredible. I mean, you could find 1,000 people and play out their entire lives, and none of them will have had the kind of experience that I'm sure that you went through in those type of situations.
Well, there were a lot of us that did the invasion. There's lots of folks out there that had that experience, but hopefully, getting the opportunity to tell some of these stories to your audience is a way that folks still remember that the war happened, the invasion
Yeah.
happened. I just went to a symposium that talked about Iraq 20 years later, hosted here in Columbus at the National Infantry Museum. It was nice to reflect. You said early on that once you have these moments of reflection, things open up for you, and it's good to look back 20 years and we did a few things right in Iraq. We did a lot of things wrong, and sort of muddled our way through to what Iraq is today in 2023. But I do have friends that do business in Iraq now. They walk around downtown Baghdad. And so things have turned out okay, but it was a long road to get there over the last 20 years.
What do you think the legacy of that conflict is going to be?
The bumper sticker of that conflict is, we went to war on basically trumped up intel, and it's a war we didn't need to do, and since then it's been proven there wasn't WMD, and Saddam didn't have ties to Al Qaeda. um, and maybe if we'd focused more on Afghanistan rather than spending all this energy to invade Iraq and help it grow, that war might have turned out better too.
Yeah, I think I mean we could spend a 3 hour symposium here dissecting that. So I want to ask you a sort of slightly different question. How much time did you spend in Iraq, all told, through the three tours there?
The invasion was about 3 4 months, 13-month tour in '05, and then 15 months in '07 '08. So 20 28 32 ish.
So
um,
couple years, really, like
yeah.
three over 3 years cumulatively. So while you were there, were there did you get to spend time sort of did you get to spend much time out in what you would consider sort of cultural Iraq, regular, not on the base, you're like sort of out among the people. Did you get to spend a lot of time out there, or were you always really focused in the base?
The '03 war, we basically spent the war living in the Humvee, driving north to Mosul and fighting. There were a couple times when we occupied, like one time we occupied an AK-47 factory on the
Oh,
outskirts of Baghdad that was making gold and silver AK-47s for Saddam to present to people, which that was kind of interesting.
were you able to take one home?
No, at that point in time, we weren't allowed to take war trophies, and then that
Yeah,
rule got got turned over about a month later.
that's yeah, you could have had one.
Right, I could have had one. So I got to meet the Iraqis, not as much as I got to meet the Afghans, because Afghans, my goal was to try to be outside the wire 6 days a week in Afghanistan. The subsequent tours in Iraq, I was outside the wire maybe 1 day a week.
Okay.
I was an operations officer at that point in time, so supposed to synchronize the work of 3,500 people or 700 people, and so I didn't get as much time outside working with Iraqis. Interestingly, my assessment out of the two is, I enjoyed meeting the Iraqis. I enjoyed working with them, um, and had a good relationship with them. Iraq was a much more modern country. The oil had provided a certain standard of living that wasn't the same in Afghanistan. So there were things that I could do, like every night I would have my interpreter show up, and we would call the Iraq army guys that we were working with, and just shoot the breeze, find out what intel they may have gotten or what they did or if they needed help. And so there were ways that I could bridge it, where in Afghanistan they shut down the cell phone network at 6 p.m.
Oh
And
wow.
so you couldn't make those same sort of phone calls out to the folks that you were working with. So you had to go meet them face to face.
What is Iraqi culture like? If you meet the average Iraqi citizen, what's that culture like? What kind of food do they eat? Are they friendly? Are they what does Iraqi culture look like?
I guess let's talk food, since this is they don't do barbecue. Well, they do a version of barbecue. The goat and sheep are prevalent.
Yeah.
It's a big deal to slaughter a sheep or a goat. They'll cook it up. We would call it, the pejorative term was a goat grab, where they would basically take uh, plywood and put it on sawhorses and then cover it, and then they'd put this huge thing of rice with raisins and other things in it, and then there'd be meat, and you get some pieces of bread, and you could reach in. Everybody would sort of stand around the sawhorses, and you could reach in and grab your meat and
Oh
rice,
wow.
and just eat it. They were also big on they they were big tea drinkers, and the tea would sort of come in this large kind of shot glass,
Okay.
and it would have like a half inch of sugar on the bottom, and the rest of it with this deep brown tea. Um, I really liked the tea. The tea was good, and I enjoyed going to the, the opportunities where we got to eat with the Iraqis. Um, Iraq is divided into there's three different groups in Iraq. There's the Kurds, the Sunnis, and the Shias. Um, Sunni and Shia are both um, subsets of Islam, but they
Right.
believe different things, and so each group had a slightly different culture. They were all part of the same country, but each group was slightly different.
Well, that's fascinating to me. I mean, that's not hard to wrap your head around. I mean, if you're in the United States and you go find somebody who's like a Bay Area California guy and an Alabama redneck and a guy from Brooklyn, New York, and you put them all in the same room, like yeah, the cultures are distinctly different, right? And um, I can imagine the Sunnis and the Shias are probably the same way. Did you get a chance to experience Afghan food very often when you were in Afghanistan?
Yeah, I ate a lot. I spent a lot of time out with the Afghans. Um, y- so in that role, I spent a lot of time with the governor of Paktika province and eventually Ghazni province, and then there were multiple organizations that we work with: the Afghan police, the Afghan army, and then a group called the NDS, or National Directorate of Security. Um, and so each of those folks had key players, and as the leader of this 600-person organization, the largest American organization, I had to go see those guys face to face. And so there were lots of opportunities to eat and more tea um, there. Um, and just I, I had interestingly, uh, as you compare and contrast the two groups, and this is just a general rule of thumb, organizationally, the 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 Iraqis were more organized. The groups
Interesting.
that we work with were more organized than the Afghan groups, but I made better friends with the Afghans. The Afghans just, um, to I don't know, for whatever reason, I made better friends and closer contacts with the Afghans. Part of that may have been the difference in the role between the two countries.
Sure.
I spent more time with the Afghans, but the Afghans did this big flat bread, uh, um, that was, every corner would have this bread bakery place that had just these huge pieces of flat bread that were really really good to eat.
Is there a food somewhere in the Middle East that you miss being back home in the States? Is there anything that you're like, boy, I wish I could get my hands on some blank?
I've been to an Afghan restaurant. Part of the struggle in with both places is I tended to have an interpreter in both places. But in both places, I was working. Uh, I My job on the American side took so much energy that I didn't have time to pick up much of the language ever, other than to say hello and goodbye and thank you.
Right.
Um, and the interpreters would always order, and so I never really knew what I was getting. And so when you go into the restaurant, it's tough to go, oh yeah, I want to get this or that because, um,
You don't know what to say. You're just like, the thing that used to have the thing
yeah.
and the other thing.
The one place I go to probably once a month though is, there's a really great Korean restaurant here in town. I did a year in Korea, and Yaki Mandu and bibimbap. Bibimbap is this stone bowl with rice and an egg and some meat and
Oh,
some vegetables. It's kind of the original sort of poke bowl, and then you can put the red hot sauce on it, and mix it all up. And the stone bowl will keep cooking the rice along the edge, and then the rice on the edge gets all crispy.
oh
Um,
wow.
it, it's it's amazing.
That sounds great. I don't think we have Korean restaurants in Birmingham, but maybe we do. If we do, like hit me up an email if you're hearing this. But
All right. I'll be through Birmingham next week.
that sounds good. We crowdsource it. Like I certainly know where all the barbecue joints are, but not the Korean restaurants. So David, I could talk to you all day about this stuff. It's so fascinating. Your career is incredible. The service that you did for our country is amazing. If somebody wanted to connect with you about executive coaching or anything else, how could they get a hold of you?
The website, the fivecoatconsultinggroup.com, my email, david.fivecoat at the fivecoatconsultinggroup.com. Please hit me up. Would love to talk to you, and love to see if I can help you out, become a better leader.
Where can they find that blog? Is that on the Five Code Consulting Group website?
Yeah, it's on the Five Coat Consulting Group. There'll be a little pop up that shows up if they subscribe to it. They'll get an email in their inbox once a week with the latest blog post.
Awesome. All right, let's give one last little chicken check. I've got a probe at 160, which means we're almost home. Can you
Wow,
see
that
that,
thing looks
David? Look
great.
at that, baby. Come on. Get you some of that. So the chicken's getting a little crispy skin on the outside. We see the cornbread stuff is starting to cook in the middle. We got nice crispy wings on the outside. Obviously, we did take the drumsticks off of this chicken, which we're going to use in another kind of thing. But excited to get into this. Thank you so much, David, for being here. Guys, if you found this episode valuable, I would thank you. I'd be so grateful if you could share this with a couple of people. If you found some valuable tidbits in this episode, certainly go find David at his website. Follow us on social media where you look for Smoke Business on TikTok, Instagram. We're 20,000 followers strong on those different platforms. And like and follow and make sure you get the new episodes, subscribe. Thank you guys so much for being here, and we'll see you next time on the Slow Smoke Business. Thanks, David.